Hi, I'm Alani. I'm Black, female, and neurodivergent, aka I lost the genetic lottery. The only thing I could do is pull myself up by my bootstraps and live whatever life takes me. If anyone deserves to profit from my trauma, it's me. That's the life of a Neurospicy Black girl. Welcome to Neurospicy Black Girl, the only place where, actually surprisingly, I'm not by myself this time. This time I am doing my first Neurospicy collaboration. So joining me today is Liz from the podcast Professional Pimpology.
Hey, my name is Liz. I'm so happy to be here today. And Alani is super awesome. And I just wanted to collab with her and hop on her podcast. So here I am.
Thank you for being here. And thank you for wanting to collab with me. It was really an honor. Let's get to know each other a little bit more and introduce yourself to my audience as well. So although this might be a very hated question in regular interviews, but can you tell us more about yourself?
Well, so I had my own epiphany over the last couple of years of understanding that I too am a neurospicy Black girl, which is very, very interesting. I mean, I'm super outgoing, but then I'm extroverted and introverted. I'm loud and quiet. And I am pretty much just, as of right now, I work in community engagement, which is super fun. I love helping my community. I love working with the kiddos and everything. And my job is super awesome. But the thing about it is that I've always struggled with my regular life, your regular 9-to-5 life and being a creative. And over the past couple of years, I've been, attempting to explore, my creative side. Typically growing up, they just was read books, which reading is fundamental. And I agree. But I'm actually an 80s baby. So, computers in the home really wasn't a thing. Until I was maybe about 15 or 16 and I didn't have access to a lot of things. My parents didn't really nurture, they would give me a little paint set. That was probably about it. In terms of art, there was nowhere to really expand. So it took me a while to realize that, what my interests were. And I just kind of wanted to explore those interests. And I realized that I love tech. I love art. And I'm not very good at those things, but I'm learning. And I think that that's the main thing about myself is that I love to learn because, first I have to be showed things to know if I even have an interest and want to explore it. So I would classify myself as a great explorer. I'm here to explore everything. When I gravitate towards something, then just try to study it more and see if that might be a thing.
You're also a neurospicy Black girl like me. If you mind telling us, what is your condition?
That's an interesting question. Well, I know for sure that I've been diagnosed with ADHD. There's been others that has been floating around. I don't feel like they were necessarily accurate, but definitely the ADHD for sure. Possible CPTSD. Again, we're still exploring that. But that ADHD definitely be kicking. So I know that that's definitely a thing. My mom found out when I was 2. Now, remember, I'm an 80s baby. So health, mental health, it's not necessarily a thing in the Black community, especially when you are with, Caribbean parents. So, it was just always just stop your foolishness. So I actually was lead poisoned when I was 2. So I ended up going and getting a lot of diagnostics. And that's when they found out that I had ADHD. And I think my mom would have been okay with certain things. But then, typically they just heavily medicated kids in the 80s. And when I was about 6, they was yeah, we want to give her Ritalin. And she was no. And I'm happy she said no. But that was pretty much it for any kind of advocacy for the ADHD. And she never told me. I always got in trouble in school for talking. I was a great student, but, in that little comment section, she talks too much and she's a little fidgety. And I would get in trouble for these things. And now I'm well, why would you whoop my ass for it if I got ADHD? That's, So, but, she wasn't educated, about it. And the only thing was medication and that's it. We didn't have all of the tools that we have now of modifications and accommodations and things like that. So truthfully, when I became a teacher, maybe about 3 years ago, and again, I actually have worked in the mental health field as an advocate, and I'm like, if I didn't know any better, I would think I have ADHD, and it was always like a running joke and everyone kind of laughed about it. But then I'm like, no, wait, I actually do think I have ADHD. And then when I did go to a therapist and they're like, oh yeah. And then I tell my mom, hey, they told me that I have ADHD. And she's like, oh yeah, that's what they told me you had. I'm like, what? You knew this whole time that I had the ADHD and you did not tell me? And she's like, oh, but you were fine. And I'm like, yeah, but life was also very difficult. And it would have been nice if you would have told me that I had these things. And, and again, I'm just like, why'd you whoop my ass for having ADHD? She's like, well, I didn't look at it that way. And I'm like, yeah, but, I give her a lot of grace because, if you don't know, you don't know. And they just didn't know. We weren't having the conversations that we have now. So,
wow, honestly, I did not expect lead poisoning to be a part of the story. But wow, yeah, the 80s, man.
Yeah, the 80s was tough.
Yeah, even with technological advances, I don't think times have changed, especially if you have Caribbean parents.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that at least it is more acceptable, right? Like it's more, we're hearing it more. It's more mainstream. And I feel like they think about it a little bit more than they did in the past, but there's still like a big divide of that understanding. But I do feel like, they're a little bit more open-minded. Like I notice now they're a little bit more open to therapy, but I still feel like they think that diagnoses are an excuse. Like, oh, like you should just like triumph and get over it. And I'm like, but that's not how that works.
Right.
Like, I mean, I do believe in personal accountability. I have dealt with people who would use, I don't want to say that they would use their, diagnoses as an excuse, but it still was like, you're not doing your due diligence. Like, start somewhere. Like, even if, we want you to be here, it's like, okay, well, what is that baby step? Whatever it might be, But at the same time, it's kind of like, you can try and fail. That's okay. Just try,
Right.
So, yeah, that's where I'm at with that.
And we're going to segue into how you use your ADHD for your podcast, Professional Pimpology. So can you tell me, like, what inspired you to create Professional Pimpology and how does neurodivergence influence your storytelling?
Well, okay. So again, I'm super happy to be here because you are a graduate of the BRIC Podcast Intensive. And last year, I was part of that cohort. And being completely honest, recently, I've been focusing on my neurodivergency and how it would affect me, which is funny because, again, as an advocate, like I'm really great at telling someone else, like, hey, you have to be patient with yourself and, this is your diagnosis and it's okay if you have to work around things. But for whatever the reason, those things didn't apply to myself. It was actually, be inspired by your podcast. And I'm like, hey, you know what? I need to pay a little bit more attention. So when I came to see the new cohort graduate and I saw your podcast, like I immediately gravitated because I'm like, because the truth of the matter is, just like you, I was super excited to get into my podcast and neurodivergency hit. It caused me to be a little depressed, not being able to do the things that I knew that I was capable of, but then having these blockages and not being able to understand what's going on. And I'm like, you should be able to triumph. You could do it. And then it was like, wah, wah, wah. Because like, I just was like in that space. So, that's the reason why, like, I'm happy to collab with you and, for us to do one episode on your podcast and for me to basically, is this like my welcome back party almost talking about my neurodivergency? Ooh. Like, yeah, I think this is my welcome back party because so last intensive, I hit the ground running. I had my one episode and then it was crickets because, again, neurodivergency, creeped up on me. So, that's why I'm kind of super excited to incorporate my neurodivergency in my podcast because I'm not the only one. So, my podcast, Professional Pimpology, it is still going to be true to how it was, but I'm going to incorporate some things. So basically, I feel like, generally speaking, employers are our pimps and we're their hoes. Like, I feel like there's just a lot of exploitation, and I don't want to be a pimp by any means, but I don't want to be a hoe either. Like, I mean, this should be mutually beneficial, So I actually stumbled upon a book a few years back from this guy, this pimp. He wrote a book and it was like 48 Laws of Pimping or something like that. And I'm like, hey, how can we have those rules applied to the workplace? So that is where professional pimpology, came about because, I am a professional, but I'm also studying these pimp rules. So that's where professional pimpology comes in. And how my neurodivergency will now tie in is that we have to be honest with ourselves and explore, all of the dynamics of what makes us who we are, because there's this rule book. When you go to school, there are these rules, and even with this pimp book, there's these rules. But everyone can't follow the rules the same way because everyone is different. So, I'm definitely want to talk about, like, if this is a standard rule, how can you adjust that rule for everyone? Because we don't live in the world by ourselves. So it's not like we can expect everyone to just completely change the rules because I'm neurodivergent. Not to mention, what happens if you have two neurodivergent people in the same room? Then which one do you choose, right? So,
right, like right now.
Right, like right now. So, we definitely, want to learn the rules, but then also modify it so that we can be successful. Because if we look at a rule and it's a rule that only could be done one way, and I can't do it that way, then does that mean that I should completely give up? No, that means that I have to modify it for myself.
That's really a lot, but still good. We NDs, like, we got a lot to talk about and stuff.
Mm-hmm,
so yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So about your professional pimping.
Well, professional pimpology.
Pimpology, yeah. I bet a huge part is about communication, essentially.
Yes,
my question would be, what was your first experience disclosing your neurodivergence to someone?
In the past, I was a job developer. So a job developer is someone that goes out and they find employment for individuals. And I was working with individuals that had intellectual disabilities as well as mental health. The thing about it is that I was taught that, everyone should be accepting. I quickly realized that that is not the case. So it actually made me a little nervous to disclose personally because, like, I even noticed my coworkers who should have the same open-mindedness, because, again, if you chose this job, then you should do this job well. They did not live by the standards that, at least that I have, in terms of being accepted and understanding of people, with any kind of disability, not just necessarily mental health, but just across the board. And, I would hear the disparaging remarks that they would say, to them and about them. And, a lot of times, like, I would never forget one time we had a client that was schizophrenic. And there was this one coworker that would just, anytime she had a complaint about him, he would be like, she made it up. And I'm like, well, okay, yes, there are times that she may have episodes, but anytime something comes up, we need to, fully analyze the situation because she's not always making it up. And, he was using that as a crutch, but I was able to see, no, you were wrong. Okay. And again, I'm a very strong advocate. And so with that being said, I always had concerns of saying, hey, this is what I'm going through, because then when I have something legitimate that I'm talking about, I feared that they would just say, oh, well, she's just such and blah, blah, blah. And then especially since people aren't even educated about, how, different neurodivergent, people behave, or act. Like, even if someone is depressed, they will just kind of be like, oh, yeah, she's just exaggerating or whatever. And, she could get up out of bed. And I'm like, I'm grateful. I'm happy for you that you've never experienced that, so you can't identify, because clearly you don't understand, So getting back to the actual question. So, in my friendships, I would say, hey, not necessarily like I have ADHD. That actually came because, again, I didn't realize I had ADHD till like a few years ago. But, even like just saying, oh, I'm depressed. And they're like, oh, girl, well, we all depressed and we all, my biggest pet peeve, we all got a little bit of ADHD. I'm like, no,
Oh yeah, I hate that statement.
right. So, I'm always very, very careful about disclosing. However, in my personal relationships, yeah, I've been a little bit more open, but professionally, especially since I used to be an advocate, and basically with any job that you have, like regardless of what your condition is, you have to be able to fulfill the basic functions of the job. And I saw that there were times that I was unable to. So at that time, I kind of had to disclose, especially, as a teacher, I had to disclose. And I disclosed actually the physical. I disclosed like my physical disabilities. I actually did not disclose the mental health because I felt like people can understand physical limitations more than they can understand mental health limitations. So I actually have never disclosed professionally my mental health conditions, but I have disclosed like those invisible, physical. And even still, I did not get the response I was hoping for. So like it still kind of makes me nervous to disclose, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I get it completely. Because I'm an entry-level professional, and I've heard about horror stories about disclosing during the job and even before the job. Like, for example, on applications, like if you put that you have a disability of any kind, and I've experienced it myself too, like my application automatically gets like rejected and stuff.
Right.
Like I don't even make it to the interview stage.
Right.
And like, so I've purposely not disclose my disability or even my race, probably only my gender, because I'm like, I want to get at least to the interview stage, And as far as like disclosing my neurodivergence, like I felt like at times where I tried to disclose, I feel like it was sort of like used as, and perhaps it's because I was at like a toxic work environment. I felt like it was like sort of used as an attack against me.
Yes.
Or like I was sort of like used as like a threat, essentially, where like I was like looking to like under a microscope, like if I make any little mistake or mistake in quotation marks, or if I just have like an off days, it's like, oh nope, performance improvement plan.
Right.
Like, I feel like they were just like looking for a way to get me out, essentially.
Right. The thing that I find kind of interesting too, because again, well, okay, let's start off with there's a lot of undiagnosed people walking around. Let's start off with that, So like a lot of times it's so funny that someone that they might actually have that condition and it actually might be more severe, but because they haven't been diagnosed, they will like point the finger at you and like shame, shame, shame. And it's kind of like, well, I'm receiving the support that I need and I hope you do the same, But like, even if someone is neurodivergent, sometimes it's not like, we're human, right? Everyone is human. Everyone makes mistakes. So, for me, what kind of annoyed me is like someone that was bold enough and honest enough to say, hey, this is my condition. They would often be demonized, or, ostracized. And it's kind of like, okay, but that could have been a mistake that anyone could have done. Anyone could have made it, whether you are diagnosed, undiagnosed, whatever it is. Adulting is hard in general. I think everyone struggles with it. Like, I almost feel like you would have to be an alien to not struggle with being an adult, if you're going to be a responsible adult, right? And yeah, I just feel like oftentimes like things that are just typical for anyone to do, it'll be like, aha, because she has this, and this is the reason why, and it's just things, people being people, so.
Have there been times where like you regretted disclosing, what if it's in the workplace or in general?
Man.
Oh man, that breath.
So when it comes to dating, which, man, am I hearing episode 2 coming along? Because dating is particularly tough for me, right? Because I feel like, even when it comes to my friendships or work, I can kind of like separate that time, So if I am going to be masking, which I don't think I mask intentionally, but then I do still believe that I do it. and it's kind of like, okay, I can mask for a certain amount of time. But then when you have a personal relationship, and assuming that you like this individual and they're around, then there's going to be things that you can't hide. So I feel like I have to be honest, with that. And I mean, and isn't that the whole point of having a relationship? Like having a relationship and dating means that you should have someone that you could rely on. And I feel like I've disclosed things that I've gone through in the past. So it wasn't necessarily me disclosing that I had a condition. Because again, to be fair, I don't know if I really believed the diagnoses that I had at the time. But, I disclosed things that obviously would be a little alarming, and people would probably assume, oh, you would have issues having gone through these things. And then they're just like, in an argument. And again, valid point. Like, if you are cheating, if I see that you have, not followed the rules that we have set in our relationship and you've cheated, why are you calling me crazy?
Right.
Like, why am I crazy? Like, it is a very logical response to be upset that your boyfriend or whoever you may have in your life is not being faithful. And then they would turn around and use that prior history of, oh, you're just sensitive because of da-da-da-da-da. It's not a big deal. And it's kind of like, listen, I'm not even saying that there isn't truth to that. Like, I may be more sensitive to someone crossing boundaries because of, my diagnosis or, things that I've dealt with in the past, but you were still wrong. And I feel like people
That's a form of manipulation, by the way. Yeah.
Right. And I feel like they will escape accountability. So, because I've disclosed these things. So then it's almost like, I feel like if I didn't disclose, then you would not be able to use that as an excuse. And we would just have to focus on the issue, which is you were wrong here, but, so I struggle with letting people in and dating. And I'm like, dude, I mean, it's cute. I like the idea of dating. It seems nice, especially, Christmas time. It'd be cute if we had a little matching pajama set, but I do not want to be gaslit. So if I'm going to have a beautiful, relationship, then you have to be open. And I'm not sure how open I am because you have to kiss a whole bunch of frogs before you get the prince. And I don't really like frogs like that. So I'm struggling. But I do know that when I am ready to date, then, I'm going to have to be open. And I think the best thing that we all should do, I mean, and not even necessarily just being neurodivergent, but just anything that might be tough to have a conversation about, is that we should really evaluate this person to see if they are worthy of us opening up to them. I think that that's kind of where I might have gone wrong. If someone does not have the ability to understand, or they don't have the maturity to know how to, have certain conversations without using it as an attack, then maybe that person should not be in your life, But it definitely takes me a while to be able to pinpoint, certain things to determine whether or not I should go to the next level. So I'm just avoiding dating like the plague right now.
Yeah, I get it.
But we'll see. Yeah.
I mean, the dating pool is not really looking good so far.
It's not. It's really not. So.
Yeah. Which actually, when you talk about reaction and stuff, actually brought me to like a good question I wanted to ask. How do you handle misconceptions or stereotypes that people maybe have about neurodivergence?
You know what? So I feel like when you're neurodivergent, for a lot of people, they have reduced confidence. And I just stand on it. I'll just, that's not correct. Actually, no, you watch too much TV. Maybe you need to educate yourself. Like, I'll kind of put, like, if I see someone that's being like super ignorant, I'm like, oh, well, I'm grateful that I am working on my issues. You too need to do the same. And I will forward some articles to help you become more familiar. Like, I think that that's kind of what I will do at this point. If someone legitimately don't know, but they're being super open-minded about it, then, I won't be as catty with that. But, in general, like, I'm great to like send a link. Yeah, read this article to help yourself become more familiar or whatever. But, anyone who, I always try to check myself. Let's start with that. Because I'm not going to lie. Even myself, as well-versed as I'd like to say that I am, I too fall into stereotypes, like I have assumptions about, cultures that I'm not familiar with where I think that everything is an absolute truth and it's not correct. So again, the same way I'm open-minded for someone saying, hey, and educating me, if I do know something that person don't know, then, I just try to spread that information. I'm like, actually, that's not really accurate. It is a lot harder to do, though, when they're attacking you in the moment. So, yeah, when I'm getting attacked, I'm like, oh, clearly you don't know. So, I might be a little stank with it. Like, yeah, oh, so you don't understand and you're misinformed, but it's okay because I'm here to help you. So this is how it really works.
Hey, I think we need to be more stank, to be honest. I feel like I've been being too nice to people or something. Sometimes I just want to, go off,
I'm not going to lie. The spicy part in Neurospicy, baby, I got it. Like, listen, you're not going to just tell me. Because, again, I understand that everyone's not going to know everything, right? Everyone is not going to know everything. So I'm not going to fault someone for not knowing something because there's a lot of things that I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But it's when they want to be wrong and strong. Oh, it just feels good to just knock them down like bam, bam, bam. You're wrong. Here's the proof. Here's the evidence. And and again, if you're just standing in your truth and someone is, and I'll flat out tell people when we're having a conversation and they're being ignorant, I'll be like, well, I don't really know how to argue with stupid, so I'm going to just exit out of this conversation. And that's it.
Yeah, that's what you got to do. I think it's the art of war where it's you got to choose your battles.
Right. I mean, and truthfully, and you know what? It's okay. I'm not going to say it's okay. Let me take that back. It's not okay to be ignorant, right? But sometimes it takes us a while to realize that we have that ignorance, right?
Right.
So if the
self-awareness.
Right. If you're not self-aware, even if it's in your face, you're not going to understand it. And it's not even like a judgment thing to say because I've been there too, where I said what I said because I thought I was right. Like people oh, because you always think you're right. And I'm like, well, if I thought it was wrong, I wouldn't have said it. So clearly I thought it was right, but I am open-minded enough to know that I'm not right about everything. So, and I'll apologize. And that's another thing too, apologizing. Because sometimes I'm wrong and I might have been stank unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But then I have no problem saying, you know what? I apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't realize X, Y, Z or 1, 2, 3. But I'm here now. Or,
mm-hmm.
And again, and it's up to them whether or not they want to accept it or not. If they don't want to accept it, it's okay. There's no beef on my end. But, people accept things when they're ready to accept it.
Right.
But I'm not arguing with stupid,
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just I'm done. And that's pretty much how I would deal with that. I'll try to check them right then and there. If they're not open to it, then I just walk away.
Yeah.
Most people aren't even important enough in my life for me to try to explain these things to them. So it's like, if you have no real value to me, I kind of don't care what you think. But now if it's your friend or your boss or your mom, then it's like, all right. But honestly, no, even my mom, I'm like, okay, so I'm over this conversation. And I'll still walk away. At the end of the day, there's no reason for me to continue to engage in a conversation because one thing that I know about myself, I am open-minded and I'm calm until I'm not. And I don't really know how to deal with my own ignorance. And I actually know when I'm getting to that point, but I cannot take it back. Once Pandora's box was open, that's it. And so I actually, since I'm aware and I know that about myself, when I start seeing myself in situations that could get me there, I'm just going to exit.
Right.
Because then I'm going to be wrong. And, oftentimes people focus on how the person said something. Even if they were right, they're focusing on the delivery. So I always want to make sure that you understand what I was saying and that how I reacted to it wasn't a distraction. Mm-hmm. So as soon as I find myself getting ignorant, that's okay. It's time for me to go.
Yeah, sometimes it's just not what you say. It's how you say it.
It is how you say it. And again, across the board. And I feel like we need to be aware of, people's, limitations across the board.
Mm-hmm.
But how about we're just nice to everyone across the board? I think that goes a long way. And I think that's kind of part of the things, too, that I struggle with, where it's kind of like, okay, yes, I might need certain things because I have, conditions or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, nobody should be experiencing these things, right? So like when we talk about boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
I will probably be more affected by someone, crossing a boundary because I have limitations, but you should not cross anyone's boundaries, right? So it's almost like I get a little defensive of me feeling like I have to disclose so that people can just be the general good humans that they should have always been. It's like, well, truthfully, I would not need an accommodation if you were just a good human. Like, why do I need this,
Honestly, I feel like that's a bigger conversation that we got.
That's a bigger conversation.
Yeah, we got to circle back to that in a future episode.
Yeah. I definitely see some round 2 and 3s coming through with this collaboration.
Yeah. And speaking of limitations, I was talking about the whole, you probably heard of it, about X neurodivergence is a superpower, like ADHD is a superpower, autism is a superpower, etc. So, to settle this. Yeah, okay.
I hate it.
I didn't have to ask.
I hate it. So here's the thing. Having ADHD, sometimes you can hyperfocus, right? And I do appreciate those moments. So I understand where they're going in terms of it being a superpower. But I hate it so much because it's kind of like there are limitations, Yeah, I don't really like to say that there are pros and cons. I just think that everyone is different. Everyone has, different strengths. But when you're like, it's a superpower, they make it seem like it's opening a door that other people don't have. And I'm like, no, because as much as I can hyperfocus, sometimes I like spiral down the hole, even in preparing for our episode. And I felt so bad, I felt so bad because, I'm like, I was sick. I wasn't feeling well, which that brought me down the spiral. And then, of course, now there's a little bit of anxiety that comes together, comes into place. And I'm like, I got to review my notes. And what do I end up doing? Researching socks. Why am I looking? And then I'm like, and I'm almost like yelling, like, but why are you looking at socks now when you have to like prepare for this episode? I don't think that was a superpower. Like I was aware why that was happening, but I couldn't stop it from happening. So no, I don't think that it's a superpower. I feel like there are times that things can work in your favor, but to call it a superpower, I will say is a bit of a reach.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I like how you said that there are sometimes it can work in your favor and other times it could be a huge disadvantage.
Right. Like definitely like it's a huge, I found it more of a disadvantage than an advantage because, okay, when it comes to like people being able to like read minds or being invisible, like those are considered to be superpowers.
Right.
If I told you I could read your mind, you would be like, wow, that's amazing. I've never heard anyone say, wow, you have ADHD? That's great.
Right,
so
exactly.
I don't really think it's a superpower because if it was a superpower, then there would be more of a positive response.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
like, I wouldn't be like, infantilize, in my case.
Yeah, because, I either get the, you got to get over it or we all have a little bit of ADHD. We're all a little autistic. I'm like, no. There's actually a set of criteria outlined by the DSM-5 that will diagnose you. Which, interestingly enough, like when it comes to autism, my therapist actually is like, yeah, you could be, because
same here.
Because see, historically, in the past, which is why I love the evolution and the, the learning that we have in terms of like mental health conditions, if you had ADHD, you could not be autistic, prior to, you just could not have both of those diagnoses together, and those that are close to me might be able to see my quirks more than someone that sees me in passing, and, so we're not sure. But again, needless to say,
and autism and ADHD, sorry to interrupt, they have comorbidities.
Right.
So, yeah, they have lots of similarities to one another.
Right.
Or overlapping symptoms.
Right. So I'm not gonna self-diagnose. I have not been officially diagnosed, although the question has come up a few times. But I knew, I did self-diagnose myself as ADHD before, not knowing that I had that diagnosis in the past, and it has been confirmed. So I could definitely speak on that. Mm-hmm. And it ain't a superpower, okay? Okay, at least not for me. But there are times that it is useful. Like, perfect case in point. So society likes extroverted individuals, for whatever the reasons, they just kind of like push everyone to be extroverted.
Yep.
I'm not. Okay, I am an extroverted individual. I admit this, because, and again, it could be my ADHD making me a little hyperactive,
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I've just learned certain places where, it works, right?
Right.
So okay, in that aspect, maybe it's an advantage, but then it's still a disadvantage because then I deal with burnout. Like, after I've gone to that great party and everyone was like, oh yeah, we had such a great time with Liz. Liz is now down for 2 to 3 days because I am tired.
Yes.
So again, there are times where it works in certain scenarios, and I can't quite pinpoint when I'm being an ADHD, or I don't know. This is just the way I've always been, but I am trying to be more mindful to understand it. But at the same time, too, I don't want it to define my life, right? So it's like I'm paying attention and I'm being aware, but I'm just still being Liz at the end of the day, and I'm just like, if that's my thing, that's my thing. But sometimes I'm aware that I'm, having an ADHD moment, and it works. So I'll use it when I can. But yeah, that downtime is not fun at all.
So I want to sort of wrap this up. Since we talked about the real effects of being called a superpower and just being misunderstood in general, what would be some advice you would give to someone, especially either an entry-level professional or even someone that's above entry level, if they realize that they are neurodivergent or they have the diagnosis but they still don't know how to disclose it? How would you say they would go about disclosing it, whether it's in the workplace or with their friends, family, etc.?
I'm still said person trying to figure out how to disclose to people. I mean, okay, the first thing that I would just say is that we have to accept that everyone will not accept, our thoughts, right? First, assess your situation, right? Because it may not be appropriate to disclose sometimes, especially if you have a job. So when it comes to work, make sure you can actually do the job, right? I have a job that requires a lot of communication. If your condition prohibits you from communicating, maybe you shouldn't choose that job, right? So let's start off with, when it comes to work, making sure that we are fully knowledgeable of, and again, we'll never learn everything. I learn things about myself every day,
Yeah.
And I thought I knew it all, and I did not know everything. So just continue to educate yourself, because you have to be comfortable with yourself before you expect someone else to be comfortable with you. So I would start off with that, After you do that, then you would definitely want to assess the situation, because again, if you're saying that, you need an accommodation and it's in a direct conflict with the actual job that you do, that ain't gonna work, right? So
yeah, I might have learned that the hard way.
Right. And I would definitely say that you would want to, analyze the person that you're talking to. Initially, I wouldn't want to disclose it in a group. I would try to do it as on a one-on-one, scenario. And, just kind of see, I'll kind of like maybe drop little hints first to see how they respond to that. And then if they're open-minded, then I might disclose a little bit more. Make sure that you can trust I would say, definitely make sure you have trust in the person. And if you don't have trust in the person and you're at work, then I would just stick to the legal part that you have to tell them. Oftentimes, you don't actually have to disclose your actual diagnosis. You would just need to say that, hey, my doctor says I need these accommodations, So I think that, I almost kind of start off with that, where if I trust you, then I might go more in depth with my diagnosis and say, hey, this is how it affects me. But if I don't want to do that or I don't feel safe to do that, then typically there would be like an HR department or someone like that so like, let's say you don't feel comfortable talking to like your actual boss, then find someone that, is, within the same, well, you should know like your company dynamics and, what that ladder looks like and who would be the appropriate person. But like find that person. And even still, you don't have to say, I have this. You just need to say, I have, because if you have a doctor's note and your doctor says that this is the accommodation that you need and they decide that, oh, it's not a big deal, they actually can be held liable and you can sue them. So HR is not your friend by any means.
Learned that the hard way.
Right. They are not your friend, but they do have to follow the law. So at a bare minimum, even if they're not going to be compassionate, because again, a lot of times we're kind of hoping that we would see a little bit of compassion. We may not see that, but at the bare minimum, you need to follow the law. And if you don't follow the law, I'm going to sue you. And then I won't even have to work for you anyway because I got your money anyway. So
period.
Right. So
I'll make sure I make this a soundbite so it could be reshared. And yeah, this is really good information.
Right. Absolutely.
And also, so I got listeners that are neurotypical, aka not neurodivergent, and we got like friends and stuff that are possibly neurotypical as well. Or I would say presumably.
Right.
So how would you say, what can they do to help support us? Or at least, should I say, the bigger society should do to help support the neurospicy Black girls?
Well, I say step one is to listen to this podcast right now because we dropped a couple of gems, right? Because truth of the matter is, if it's not something that, like perfect case in point, I have a daughter. I've always taught her, to be mindful of people that are around her because you don't know what they have going on, right? But like if you were not raised in that, kind of environment, then definitely educate yourself, go to sources that can help you understand, neurodivergent individuals. And, if you have someone that's close to you, feel free to ask questions, but you definitely, I would also say test the waters as well. Like you don't want to just like jump in and ask a question that might be like extremely abrasive if that person wasn't ready to handle that. But, I would even start off by saying, hey, I had a couple of questions. Is it okay? Like ask if it's okay. Right.
Right.
Because and truth of the matter is I'm extremely open the majority of the time. So if you turn around and you assume that I'm open-minded today, and I'm having a moment, I might attack you. I'm not going to lie. So, I think that you want to start off as, is it okay if I share, a couple of questions that I might have had or a couple of experiences that I've had, So, start off by asking if it's okay. The majority of us, will say, sure, ask away. But if you don't ask me if it's okay, then I'm going to probably feel that you feel entitled to my space. And that would be a problem. So that would be the first thing. And creating safer spaces. Yeah, just don't assume. Oh, this is a big one.
Go ahead.
So neurodivergency is on a spectrum. Okay. So don't think because one ADHD person or one autistic person, they all act the same way. That is not the case, right? That is a huge one, because again, people might say, oh, well, Liz has ADHD and she could do this. So how come now you're telling me that you have ADHD and you can't? Well, because we're all different. And even there are times that I am capable of doing something at one time of my life and not capable in another. So definitely do not assume because you know one, you know them all. Yeah, so between the education component and the, not being afraid to have conversations and not assuming, I would say that those would be the top three things I would say to start to understand, people in a neurodivergent space.
Yeah, thank you. Y'all can't see, so pretend I'm like clapping and and snapping fingers. Okay, you can hear it now. So, yeah, I'm just hyping you up.
Yeah, I actually said that with a little bit of a neck roll. Like I was a little bit of stank the last time. Do not assume. Like if I could do lip smacks, I would have smacked my lips too because, that's definitely a big one. Because I think once you do that and then, because again, we would have to feel safe to have those conversations, right? And if you're coming and you're accusing and you're assuming or, you're devaluing certain things, then of course we're not going to want to disclose. And but then those barriers are still there, right? Like just because we didn't talk about it didn't mean that the issue magically erased itself. And then we have a problem. And then of course, and they'll put it back on us. Oh, well, you should have told me. Well, I did not feel safe talking to you, sir.
Right? Right.
So, yeah, I would say that would be the top three things that I could say society can do to create a safer space.
Yeah, well, thank you, Liz. I've been educated. I feel like my listeners have been educated, and I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. You got me out of my slum because, again, it's hard because the truth of the matter, as empowering as I'm sounding, I'm like, yeah, you could do it. When I go home, I have that negative self-speak. I'm like, oh, my God, you can't do it. And then when I fall short in one thing, I go down that spiral and then everything sucks. And now you can't do anything. And I really appreciated the episode that you had, which was, creating while being, neurodivergent, because I'm like, oh, my God, wait, that's me. So thank you for having me. And thank you for being, open so that we can continue to have these conversations with people.
Of course, I appreciate it. So can you tell us where everybody can find you and if you got any upcoming projects you want to promote?
Yes. So obviously, so tune in for, the second part of this conversation when we're going to be on my podcast, Professional Pimpology. And in my episode, we're still going to be talking about neurodivergency, but we're really going to hone in more into, the workplace and how to navigate the workplace and specifically using some of those pimp rules to get us from point A to point B. And I'm available on, most major platforms. So I'm on Spotify, I'm on Apple Podcasts, I'm also on YouTube, and yeah. So my next project will be part 2 with Alani in Professional Pimpology, talking about being neurospicy in the workplace.
Yes, and I'm excited to record it. I'm really hyped. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
So all links to support Liz will be in the description, and all links to support me will also be in the description. So thank you for listening. And remember, it's okay to be human. Do what feels right and best for you. So stay tuned where something new happens, and it definitely won't be boring. Bye.
Bye.